Hello, and welcome to 50 Years Ago Today. This is our chart show. We take a look at the charts from 50 years ago, in this case from 1970. And we're going to be wrapping up the 1970s. Let me just say a little bit about what this show is all about. It's kind of a nostalgia thing. We take a look at some of the background of the songs that were making the charts back in the day. And of course, we look at the Billboard Top 100, particularly the top 10 of a particular month. And some selections from the top 40.
Right.
There's always a playlist that we have parallel to this. This is an essential accompaniment to the show, because what we're doing here is nothing more than commenting on the playlist. So the playlist is in some ways the most important component. We're at the end of 2020, thank God.
Yeah.
Which means that this show, this is going to be the last 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
Years ago this month. So we're going to take a look at let the year 1970 pass in review.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so a couple things about 1970. Again, this is the year that the Beatles dissolved, very acrimoniously, of course. This is the final year that the Beatles charted as a group. You also began to see then the emergence of the solo albums from the various members. And it's very much a transition year for rock music, pop music, in that the Beatles were really the standard bearers through the 60s. If you think about the kind of music that the Beatles produced and the kind of cultural effect that the Beatles had, that nobody was really quite sure where rock was headed once the Beatles disappeared. And so this 1970 is sort of that transition year.
Well, you can kind of see it too in the way that the solo acts were then embraced.
Yes.
We had the last of their hits as a group in January, and then it was immediately followed by the stuff from Lennon, from Harrison. Did McCartney have one?
Yeah, McCartney's album comes out. It's it does. It's McCartney 1 or whatever. And
self-named, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have quite the splash after that the Harrison's album had. But I think it's interesting to note that Beatles fans, people really flocked to these solo albums, maybe in a way that even maybe were a little more popular than they deserved, just because of the nostalgia and the idea that they didn't want the Beatles to go away. And so 1970
kind of
was
like Let It Be too. Let It Be itself.
Yeah.
It was the last album that was released along with the film. And people really ate that up as well, although it's arguably really not. First of all, it wasn't the last album that they recorded, thank God.
That's right.
Abbey Road followed that.
No kidding.
But it was the last album that was released. Had some good stuff on it, but I think the popularity can only be explained by people just trying to get their last.
That's right. Beatles. I think that's absolutely right. And so 1970 is also a year where we still have, we have Nixon in office, and Nixon is in many ways nearing the zenith of his popularity. Nixon was, and I think people forget this, Nixon was an incredibly popular president with many Americans going into the end of his first term. He had remarkably high approval ratings. And 1970 for Nixon was very much a year dominated by the environment. Of course, 1970 was the year of the first Earth Day. This is also the year that Nixon initiated the Environmental Protection Agency. And so Nixon, who was an astute politician, knew which way the wind was blowing and became quite green during 1970. And in his own way, I think was a kind of political genius in this regard. You got a thought about Nixon in 70 and the environmental movement?
Well, yeah, I think we're looking at him nearing the apex of his power. It was still pre-Watergate. Of course, he won the 72 election in a landslide, which was a testament to his popularity at the time. But of course, he was still, he ran trying to get us out of Vietnam, which is one of the things that just
Right.
really undercut the power of Humphrey and McGovern as anti-war.
Right. Yeah.
But we were still completely immersed in Vietnam at this point in 1970.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nixon was never fond of the anti-war protesters.
Oh, that's true.
So when 4 kids were killed in Kent State by the National Guard, Nixon was not crying any tears.
No, he wasn't. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Which is honestly, it's quite remarkable to think in those terms. I mean, he was actually quite public in his criticism of protesters, and quite critical and public of the Kent State incident from the students' perspective. He exhibited no sympathy for the students or their families, which is on some level almost unthinkable, given the chief executive. I mean, that's kind of part of the job on some level. But the United States was deeply split in 1970 regarding Vietnam. Nixon, though,
and his AG was Mitchell, made it very clear there was no question of an investigation into that, or of any of those National Guardsmen being prosecuted.
That's right.
Well, and a large majority, I think, even of Americans were behind them in that sentiment.
Yes.
I think that the people that were scandalized by it were the minority at that point.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and I also think that also helps to explain some of Nixon's actions during Kent State. Had the United States been more split, or had the United States been leaning in the direction of the students, then I don't think Nixon would have done what he did or what he didn't do. I mean, Nixon always had an eye toward the American public. And in this sense, I guess, cynically, that makes him a politician, I guess. But also, I think it makes him, somebody who's pretty astute. And so 1970 is a very dark year in terms of Vietnam. It's a very, very dark year. And so, and one other thing, I guess, regarding 1970, in terms of popular culture, before we jump into the top songs from December 12th, David, I would be interested in your comment about this cover from TV Guide, mid-December 1970. It involves 2 forces in show business that are unique at the time. And so let's take a look. Got a comment about Muppets or Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, Ed Sullivan is a television titan, of course.
Yeah.
And the Muppets have become a cultural force to reckon with since the 60s. But I think at that point, that was still pre-Muppet Show, right?
Pre-Muppet Show, but post Sesame Street had already started. And so, yeah,
right.
Muppet Show. But yeah, so Jim Henson's Muppets were a familiar.
So they actually appeared on Ed Sullivan?
A bunch of times, upwards of over 20 times during the 1960s and early 1970s.
Wow.
And Sullivan himself, again, was this kind of classic impresario. The Ed Sullivan Show was sort of must-see TV on CBS each week. It launched many, many musical careers, as we recognize. Certainly the Beatles and Elvis Presley had something to be gained by being on Ed Sullivan. But one point about Ed Sullivan I just make here quickly is that he also featured many African-American artists during the 1960s from a variety of genres. It was really the only place on American television where you would consistently see Black acts. And that was actually quite well known in the African-American community. And it's one of the things that made the Sullivan Show popular amongst Black Americans, is that they would see Smokey Robinson. They would see Diana Ross. They'd see a whole host of people that they wouldn't see on other parts of American television. And again, in the 60s and the 70s, seeing somebody live was extremely unusual, right? That when we would see our musical acts, we would look on the back of an album cover or something. That's how we identified with people. but to actually see them perform was unusual. And it was really unusual to see black acts, and Sullivan is the place. So he's I think a really important figure in American popular culture. I think a little bit undervalued a little bit, actually. An unusual guy, an awkward guy, but an important individual for sure. So let's do this. Let's launch into the hits from mid-December 1970. At number one is Smokey Robinson and the Miracles' monster hit, Tears of a Clown, which we talked about earlier. I think I Love You at number two by the one and only Partridge Family. There we go.
Which we also talked about last month, right?
That's right. Brian Hyland, former teen idol, makes a return to the charts with Gypsy Woman, which is at number three. Then at number four, and at number four is a kind of an intriguing group, the Fifth Dimension, and the song One Less Bell to Answer.
One Less Bell to Answer. Love the song. Yet another Backrack David song. If you want to talk about just a monster songwriting team, they certainly rival Lennon and McCartney in terms of their productivity. They actually probably even produced more number one hits than Lennon and McCartney. So it's incredible. This song was actually written for Keely Smith in 1987. Keely Smith had a tremendous career, starting in the late 40s as a jazz singer, and I think she nearly died on stage. I mean, I think she worked until her last.
That's absolutely true. She was married for a time to Louis Prima, who was a famous band leader, and they had a very
musical partner to begin with.
Very interesting dynamic. The Prima Keely Smith. I didn't know that this was written for her. It's fascinating.
So she recorded in '67. It was rediscovered by legendary producer Bones Howe for the Fifth Dimension, a new group that he was producing. This appeared on their debut album, Portrait, and peaked at number two, right behind My Sweet Lord by George Harrison. And became platinum. You know, it's their first outing, and it was a platinum hit with the lovely Marilyn McCoo. Lead vocals.
Yeah, she's incredible. What a sophisticated group. The Fifth Dimension had this. They had this kind of I don't know if aura is the right word, but they had they made interesting choices as a group. The songs that they sang were oftentimes kind of complex lyrically as well as musically. They had some interesting arrangements. You're absolutely right. Marilyn McCoo was the lead figure, but the group itself was, I mean, they were really interesting. They were really interesting to listen to, and very much, I think very much kind of groundbreaking in a way, right? They had a very strong following in the African-American community, but also amongst white listeners. They were, again, that kind of era sophistication.
Yeah, and this actually made it to number one on the adult contemporary chart. And if you have a Backrack David number, it's not hard to do to make it to number one on AC charts. But it also made number four on the soul charts. So they were definitely a crossover. They were definitely had a absolute pop sensibility. But this was the first in line of hits like Let the Sun Shine and Wouldn't You Like to Fly, My Beautiful Balloon, and so on.
Up and Away, all that. A bunch of hits. They really, here in this early 70s period, they're omnipresent on the radio, particularly AM radio at the time. But again, songs that hold up. And in part, it's because of the architecture, right? If it's a David Backrack number, it's going to be well written. It's going to be, it's going to be worth holding on to. And so, so at number five, we have excuse me. Yes, at number 4 we have One Less Bell to Answer by the Fifth Dimension. At number
Oh, it's
5.
been, and by the way,
Sorry.
everybody covered it. Everybody covered it.
Oh yeah.
You know, so
Yeah, which is also, I mean, also a characteristic of a Bacharach David number.
right.
I mean, it would be, well, it would be hard to calculate the number of people who've recorded their songs over time. They are, I mean, Bacharach and David have to be, I mean, in the conversation for the most important songwriting duo of the 20th century in the United States. I mean, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
They have to be in that conversation. At number 5, when the Jackson 5 ruled the world, it's I'll Be There. And again, the Jackson 5 in 1970 are everywhere all the time. They're just, you can't get away from them. Then at number 6 is the release from George Harrison, solo release from All Things Must Pass, the hit single My Sweet Lord, and the double A, Isn't It a Pity? And so My Sweet Lord is Harrison's really first foray into the charts, and it becomes a classic in a way.
I love the song.
Yeah.
I remember being scandalized by when a neighbor told me that it was not about God at all, but about some Indian God. It was just, I didn't want to believe it. You know,
it really, I think it really, to that point, I think it really stretched people. He directly references Krishna, Indian spirituality, the Hare Krishnas. It is it's a song rooted in faith, but faith with, broadly speaking faith. And I think that's part of the reason it never became, I mean, you would think a song called My Sweet Lord and the way it came across would be a hit amongst contemporary Christian artists and whatnot, but it never landed that way because of the reference to Indian spirituality. But it's a beautiful song, but it's also a song with a very kind of troubled legal history. And so and I guess it's sort of the elephant in the room when you talk about My Sweet Lord, because it is considered a kind of straight off steal of He's So Fine, which was sung by
and Lennon said,
yes, he did. Go ahead. Yeah,
George isn't stupid. He knew what he was doing. It wasn't an accident. He didn't just, oh well, there are some similarities to He's So Fine. No, he knew what he was doing.
He knew it. In fact, even in I Mean Mine, he does reference the fact that he knew it was close, and I think he knew what he was doing. It did raise a whole series of it was litigated again. Actually stayed in litigation until 1998, and it's one of the more famous copyright violation cases in American history, and it helped to actually redefine copyright law in the United States. And so it's in that way, actually legally, it's quite important.
Well, the funny thing about it is all the people involved in that litigation were friends, right? I mean, we had,
I think that's largely the case, yes.
Phil Spector, you had who did He's Fine? It wasn't the Ronettes, it was Chiffons?
The Chiffons is written by a guy named Ronnie Mack, but that was also a universe that Spector was familiar with as well. I mean, he knew these people and stuff, and so yeah, it's a really interesting song from a really interesting album. And again, the flip side, Isn't It a Pity, is also a kind of it's a kind of challenging song, and it's it's very in its own way kind of philosophical. And the whole LP, All Things Must Pass, Has
a triple LP.
Triple LP, you know, one of those triple LPs that probably would have been better off as a very solid LP or maybe a double LP, but just in that era. This is all the songs that Harrison had built up starting in the mid 1960s, songs that he couldn't get onto Beatles albums, and this is of course quite famous how he was limited to a song or two per album, and it just was building and building and building, and then this is sort of the creative explosion.
It's interesting too that just previous to that, on Abbey Road, Harrison comes up with some of the finest work that he ever did for the Beatles.
No question.
Here Comes the Sun and Something. So it was a time when he was coming into his own musically.
That's absolutely right.
Becoming independent and just really kind of feeling his oats.
Yeah, I think it demonstrates then, had the Beatles stayed together, and there's always, always this question, but had the Beatles stayed together, I mean, Harrison would have really emerged, I think, as a very powerful force within the group. And it probably is the case that a group can't have three dynamic creative forces. A group of four probably can't have three dynamic creative forces and stay together. But the album itself made a huge impression on music. It's considered a kind of classic LP. Again, I don't think it's by any stretch a kind of perfect record. I think it's, again, too long and self-indulgent in that regard. 3 LPs. Come on, who are we kidding here? But it did establish Harrison as a force in popular music. I think that he was moving in that direction already, but I think that All Things Must Pass clearly identified him as really a central figure in popular music in the early 1970s. And then
and Harrison was already thinking about and moving toward doing a solo album.
Right.
He said in 1970, most of the Beatles thought that the direction that they were going to head in is that they would continue as a group, but everybody would have solo projects on the side as well, which had never been released up until then. But it had become such a big group with, as you said, 3 very productive geniuses. So it was no longer big enough to hold them all just within the group. So they were all looking at doing some solo work, but most of the guys thought it would be something that would always be a side project to the Beatles.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's an interesting time for the individual Beatles, right? As they begin to make these forays into their solo careers. I mean, again, like this album was on the Apple label, and so they all still had ties to Apple, which is part of the reason that the group kind of came apart. I mean, much of the friction in the group dealt really around the business of the Beatles. But
management, the Gypsy was kind of the beginning of the end.
I think that's right. No, I think that's absolutely true. But there you have it. My Sweet Lord, Isn't It a Pity, at number 6. At number 7 is Santana, at the height of the group's influence. Something called Black Magic Woman. Black Magic Woman was written actually by Peter Green, of then Fleetwood Mac, and
let me just shove this in here really quickly.
Sure, go ahead.
We were just talking about the Beatles and about the end of their career. Abbey Road, Sun King,
yes,
was written about Peter Green.
Yeah, okay, oh yeah, Peter Green. No, Peter Green was really the central figure of early Fleetwood Mac. Of course, Fleetwood Mac, Mick Fleetwood, and John McVie, the rhythm section. And Peter Green was the lead guitarist, in many ways, sort of the creative genius of early Fleetwood Mac. Peter Green, of course, quite famously had a very tragic kind of encounter with psychedelics in Germany, and by most accounts kind of lost his mind, or at least part of his mind, and left the group, and never really was the same person after that. But during Green's creative phase in Fleetwood Mac, it was a very interesting group, very blues-based group. Of course, Fleetwood Mac would have a very long career, right? It would go from the late 60s into like the mid 70s, where it would reemerge as this kind of California band, fortified by Christine McVie, Stevie Nicks, and of course, Lindsey Buckingham. But the early Fleetwood Mac is very blues-based. But Black Magic,
it's so fascinating to me. They didn't call it Fleetwood Green or Green Mac or anything like that.
Yes.
Fleetwood Mac, and those two have been the only consistent part of the group through all of its incarnations. Even now, post Buckingham, it's still
right.
McVie and Mick Fleetwood.
Yeah,
together through it all.
Together through it all.
Fleetwood Mac. That's it.
That's it. You know, it's yeah, that's a very interesting group, and a group that has gone through so many manifestations. But again, early Fleetwood Mac, as you suggest, really was dominated very much by Peter Green. Well, Carlos Santana knew of this song and saw it as something that would really work for his group, and so recorded it. This is from Abraxas, the Abraxas LP. Singing lead on Black Magic Woman is Greg Raleigh, who played keyboards. You can see Raleigh in the foreground here on the Hammond B3 organ. The Greg Raleigh has the distinction of being a founding member of Santana and a founding member of Journey, and actually having left both groups at the height of their powers. It's quite an interesting guy. For me, Black Magic Woman is a kind of perfect Santana song in that it has a kind of jam band feel to it, but yet with the discipline of a kind of pop song. There's something about Santana for me that sometimes it's just sometimes too much. It just goes on and rambles and goes in different directions, which I don't really appreciate. But there is a nice little combination here that really works well. And so Black Magic Woman is I think one of Santana's best. It's really, I think, a kind of high watermark for Santana.
Well, don't you think the 70s was just in general kind of the height of the guitar soloists and
yes,
yeah, they just kind of got spoiled, and they were allowed to just kind of jam for minutes at a time on their albums. I think the FM radio might have been an influence on that. I don't know,
I think so.
I think by the 80s, that was starting to get reined in.
I think that's right. No, but
all of the longest solos I've ever heard were from that period.
No question. I think you're right. I mean, even something like Black Magic Woman, which is restrained by Santana standards, on the album is like 5.5 minutes. The single version is 3.5 minutes, but a 5.5 minute long song on an album in the early 70s, that's a shortcut. That's a small, you saw songs that lasted half the album, or it was just, you're right, it's an age of excess on some level. There's no question about that. So Black Magic Woman at number 7. At number 8, it's kind of the tragic group Badfinger. There's always a dark cloud that hovers over Badfinger, but it's No Matter What at number 8.
Yeah, it's strange because it seems like we can't get away from talking about the Beatles. And Badfinger was actually the first group that was signed by Apple Records. At the time, they were called the Ivies and had been together since 1961. But they were signed in 67 by Apple Records and produced 5 albums for Apple Records between 68 and 73. No Matter What was their second hit. It's the second hit that we've talked about this year.
That's right.
The first one being Come and Get It, written and produced by Paul McCartney, and was a hit in America. No Matter What was their first hit in the UK, reached number 5 in January 1971. But No Matter What peaked at number 8 on the Billboard chart. from their album No Dice.
Yeah.
And this was written and sung by Pete Ham,
Yeah.
one of the main songwriters for the group, and produced by Mal Evans. Now, there was another Evans in the group, the guitarist, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
But no relation. Mal Evans
Okay.
was somebody that the Beatles had met as a bouncer at the Cavern Club.
Of course.
Was hired by Brian Epstein to be a roadie for them, and once they left the road, just kind of a personal assistant. And so this was somebody that was just around Apple Records, and in some ways a glorified gopher.
Yes.
Just did whatever kind of jobs needed to be done. And one of them was, well, producing a hit single for.
That's such a quintessential Apple Records, Apple Core kind of story. Yeah, where like the guy who's in the hall, suddenly is, yes.
Well, but Mal Evans actually did become a kind of a creative force in the later years, and sadly, and this is so in keeping with the whole Badfinger.
Here we go. Yeah.
Mythology.
Oh God,
he committed suicide by police in 1967. 76 at the age of 4.
Jeez. Yeah.
But Peter Ham also committed suicide.
Right.
75.
Yep.
And the other, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Sam Evans, I think, was the guitarist.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And he committed suicide in 1983. Interestingly, it was about he had been having discussions or arguments rather about royalties.
Yeah.
Concerning one of the, and it was all about royalties. It was all about their legal problems essentially from the minute Apple Corps started having problems with Joe Klein. Everybody was embroiled in lawsuits.
That's absolutely right. Yes.
And this ruined the lives of like at least half of Badfinger.
Yeah.
Ham committed suicide in 75. Evans committed suicide in 83 over the royalties to their biggest hit song that they never recorded.
I don't know.
Written by Ham and Evans, Without You. A huge hit for
Is that Nielsen?
Or
Who's that? Without You.
I Can't Live If Living Is Without You.
Is that Nielsen?
From Nielsen, Harry Nielsen. Yes, Harry Nielsen, and then later for Mariah Carey.
So Harry Nielsen didn't write that song? I thought, really?
I thought he had written it too. I thought it was a Nielsen song, but it was one that he got from Badfinger.
Well, that would have been that would have been an enormous amount of money. I mean, because that song was a huge hit.
It was a huge hit twice.
It's licensed in all sorts of compilations and stuff. Yeah, I'm sure it's still worth money now.
Yes. So,
oh Lord, what a mess.
Yes. So it never brought them happiness. But this was their first, no matter what, their first UK hit in 1971, number 5, and their second hit in America, and just the beginning of a really sad story.
It's a really sad story. Yeah, there's again this enormous black cloud that seems to surround Badfinger. Even when it was a band, even when they were active, there was just it just seemed Yeah. Like they were headed for tragedy. So there we have Badfinger at number 8. At number 9, it's that group from Chicago. Yes, Chicago. And does anybody really know what time it is? This is a song that peaked at number 7. This comes from their first album, the CTA album, Chicago Transit Authority. It's written and sung by Robert Lamb. It's a kind of quirky, kind of observational, kind of maybe political tune that has it's a kind of classic, I think, today. It's though a kind of quintessential Chicago number. It features, of course, the horn sections, what made Chicago, and Robert Lamb was one of the driving forces behind Chicago. He's one of the founding members of Chicago, and he still is with the group. The group is still out and about, still touring, but yeah, there you go. Again, a kind of quirky kind of number that
quirky. It's like somebody asks you, what are you doing here? And you respond, well, why is any of us, or why are any of us, what is our purpose in this life?
It's one of those, yeah.
What time it is? Do we really know what time it is? What does that mean? What is time?
What is time? Yeah. It's it's one of those things that you could either take with, sort of like make you like, oh yeah, you're right, or just you want to punch the guy. But there you go. So Chicago's with does anybody really know what time it is? At number 10 is the Guess Who with the Guess Who's this really interesting group from Canada, and at number 10 it's Share the Land.
Yeah, absolutely. Share the Land, kind of a hippie anthem.
Hippie anthem, yes.
Talking about, when the consciousness of our commonality becomes universal, well, we're just going to all share everything, and maybe I'll be there to share the land with you when this happens. It was written by Burton Cummings,
yeah.
And you kind of have the feeling that Burton Cummings was kind of had the hippie sentimentality anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
This was from their Share the Land album, which was their 7th studio album. The first album without Randy Bachman. And interestingly enough, the flip side of this was Bus Driver. And we talked last time about songs that you have the feeling maybe they were 2 songs written in one songwriting session.
Yeah.
And Bus Driver has a lot of the same vibes and same.
Oh, here we go. Right.
Of what?
Oh, come on. Oh, I don't know.
Turner Overdrive.
Oh, well, I don't know. Taking Care of Business.
Taking Care of Business. Yeah. They're all talking about on your way to work, you're bummed out. And this is no life for people. Anyway, that's just a little aside.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
This was produced by Jack Richardson, who produced most of Guess Who's material. Mm-hmm. And just a fine song. I love this. It peaked at number 2 in Canada. It just broke the top 10 on the Billboard chart.
Yeah, it's very much a song of the time, right? That this, as you talk about a kind of hippie anthem, this notion.
Anyway, it's kind of this may be one of my favorite Guess Who.
Yeah, mine too.
From many, obviously. But yeah, that's it for number 10.
Okay, very good. So let's cherry pick a little bit from the rest of the hits from December 12th, 1970. At number 18 is a solo hit from Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton, yeah, familiar name, right? Eric Clapton, who was a member of the Yardbirds, Males Blues Breakers, Cream, Derek and Domino, Blind Faith, Delaney, Bonnie and Friends. I mean, this is really the first time that Eric Clapton steps out with the song called After Midnight. written by J.J. Cale, who was a singer-songwriter out of Oklahoma. J.J. Cale, who was, I think, for many songwriters and for many guitarists, a kind of a very important figure. I mean, Cale is really considered, was held in really great regard by many folks. Mark Knopfler, John Mayer, well, Clapton himself. It's just sort of kind of somebody sort of below the surface. Cale, who passed away a few years ago, but who was instrumental in something called the Tulsa Sound. And so, but After Midnight is this, well, you know, this kind of, you know, it's a kind of dark song. There's things that happen, you know, and but it's really one of Clapton's really first sort of breakout solo hits. You got a couple thoughts about Clapton, Dave?
Well, yeah, obviously, he's a brilliant guy. I'm not quite in the Clapton is God camp, but
Yeah,
there's no question that he's one of the great guitarists of our time, and you know, you can't go wrong with like a greatest hits of Clapton. That's just, he's produced all sorts of great material, starting with Cream.
that's right.
And going from there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't disagree. I'm with you. He was an important figure for me. Never, you know, the Clapton is God thing never really rang true to me. I also think it was really hard on him. Even looking at this 45 cover. I mean, Eric Clapton in 1970 he's a mess. He's in the midst of this tangled relationship with Patty Boyd, who was married to George Harrison, and so there's these personal turmoils. He is an alcoholic, a longtime alcoholic, and also by this point he's deep into heroin, and is really troubled. And you even get, I think, a little hint of that here at this picture. It's remarkable that he pulled out of this at all, and it's also remarkable that he actually was able to be productive on any level, given the amount of his substance problems, which were quite frankly legendary. It was a complete mess at this time. But
well, yeah, you know, it's in a way, it's not a wonder how many rock legends we lost through drugs. It's a wonder how many survived.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and this is obviously a very dark time in rock and roll. I mean, you're having, you know, people like Joplin and Hendrix, Morrison. I mean, everybody's dying young, dying roughly at the same time. But as you say, I mean, it's amazing that more people didn't die, because Clapton's situation was frankly not all that unusual amongst performers. I mean, it was the rare performer who wasn't, you know, who didn't have substance abuse problems. It's just, I mean, I guess it's one of the darker sides about the late 60s, early 70s in terms of access to substance, and the belief amongst many that substance, the chemical substances were essential to, you know, to creating, and people got hooked. And Clapton was, yeah, he was a mess for years and years. Okay.
Well, the other problem, you know, and I think the other problem is because everyone was doing drugs in some form, or virtually everyone, it's hard to take a band member that you see sliding toward the edge,
yeah,
and say, look, man, you have a problem. Because you're really not in a position of
that's right,
high ground there. So you hear a lot of people talk about they're watching friends like Keith Moon, like Epstein with the Heartbreakers. They see it happening, but how are you going to have that talk? You know?
No, I don't know. Right. How are you going to have that talk? I mean, you're right. It's just, there is something, yeah. That is really, I mean, like you said a moment ago, and it's just amazing that people survived the era. I mean, to be perfectly frank, it's just amazing. Just given the attitudes, the temptations, almost the expectations. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's the rock and roll lifestyle, right?
Yeah,
Sex,
it's the lifestyle.
rock and roll.
No, that's it. No, that's exactly it. And people took that mantra, if you will, seriously in this era. I mean, they took it to the hilt for sure. So at 18, we have After Midnight by Eric Clapton. So cherry pick a couple more. At 23, it's an unusual song, perhaps to talk about here, but at 23 is Ray Price, Nashville legend, Ray Price for the Good Times. And I just wanted to mention this a couple reasons. First of all, Ray Price, huge figure in country music, 5 #1 country hits, considered a kind of Nashville crooner, kind of the epitome of Nashville cool in a way. He's a very, very kind of elegant figure, and kind of an elegant figure, revered by Nashville heavyweights, Willie Nelson in particular. Just loved Ray Price. But as you can see here on the 45, For the Good Times was written by this up-and-coming youngster named Chris Christopherson, who was at this point in a fairly established songwriter in Nashville. And Christopherson is such an interesting figure. Christopherson, who was a kind of championship athlete as a young man, was a Rhodes Scholar, has a degree in English literature from Merton College from Oxford. Was a budding songwriter, went to Nashville, bonded with Johnny Cash, who recorded his Sunday Morning Coming Down. Of course, Christopherson's Me and Bobby McGee was recorded by everyone. I guess most famously by Janis Joplin. Help Me Make It Through the Night. Why Me, which Christopherson recorded himself in the early 1970s.
Why Me, Lord?
Yeah, it's just, Christopherson also a very talented actor. I mean, honestly, I think he had a real gift in acting, and Semi-Tough, and of course, quite famously co-starred alongside Barbra Streisand in A Star Is Born, which is my favorite version of that familiar story. My apologies to Lady Gaga, but that to me, it's just the Christopherson Streisand pairing is just amazing.
No, sorry. He was in that Semino
Yes, he was in
Monster. He was the lead.
the debacle.
What?
Yes, the movie that broke Hollywood, which we will think of in a moment.
Yeah.
It was filmed in Montana. Millions of dollars were lost at the time. It was considered one of the biggest flops in film history. It actually sort of, and I can't think of the name either.
Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate.
Heaven's Gate. Thank you. And it was actually
he did a brilliant job in that.
Yeah, considered quite an interesting movie. Yeah, I think he's obviously a very talented guy. He really is a kind of quintessential Renaissance man. And I think, it's hard to pigeonhole him. Is he a performer? Is he a writer? Is he an actor? Really quite a guy. And so the Ray Price song, I think it's important because Ray Price is an interesting figure, and it's quite a good song, but it also then, reveals this great writer, Chris Christopherson, who was pushing it along. And so a couple more from the hits of the day.
He was also in Convoy, right? With Ali.
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't mention that, but that's fine. Yeah, Ali McGraw. Yeah.
Ali McGraw.
Oh my God. I'm sure as Mr. Christopherson watches this, he'll wince in pain, as you mentioned, Convoy.
I'm sure he has many fond memories of filming that.
Oh, but Ali McGraw was luminous. I mean, absolutely. But that's not that. Is that a film based on the C.W. McCall song?
Yes, based loosely on the.
That's what I was thinking. Let them truckers roll. Oh my God. Yeah. So here we go. This is one for you, Dave. At number 25, it's that little rock and roll band from England. A little tune called "See Me, Feel Me."
Oh yeah,
What's
love
that
it.
all about?
See Me, Feel Me, Listening to You, by The Who, from Tommy. This is actually parts 2 and 3 of one of their overtures. We're Not Going to Take It. In fact, on the album, the studio album, that's how it's listed. We're Not Going to Take It. And See Me, Feel Me, Listening to You are the second and third part of that. They famously performed this at Woodstock. A luminous performance, fantastic. It was after Townsend kicked Abby Hoffman off the stage, or pushed him off, or whatever. He was unceremoniously asked to leave.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, and they actually came out with this single just following Woodstock as well, to kind of capitalize on that. But this time around, it was released September 1970, and actually peaked at number 12. But we're talking about it now. I love this song. I think it's fantastic. It has some emotional depth. It builds to some fantastic, to a great peak. So that's that. Written by Pete Townsend, of course.
That's right.
And you're a big Tommy fan, so maybe you can say a little bit about.
Well, it's always struck me as, Tommy is it's always struck me that Tommy has, Townsend has been trying to convince people for 40 years or longer that Tommy is worth listening to. I think it's a little overwrought. I think there are several songs that come from Tommy that are quite interesting. I'm not sure that it holds together as a whole. I get the notion that it's important as a kind of rock opera. I think this is the transition period in rock and roll to a kind of respectability, which I don't know, is something that you want, I guess. I'm not sure. But so the notion that this would be performed by the London Philharmonic and all this kind of thing that it most famously was. I don't know. It just never.
Well, I think you preferred the Ken Russell film to the album itself, right?
Probably. Actually, yeah, I probably do.
Tina Turner, Elton John.
I prefer those performances. I do. I think that the Tina Turner performance is fantastic. I think the Elton John. I think it surpasses. I think
Elton John is fantastic. It
surpasses. It's
a real highlight.
It's amazing. Ken Russell is a little over the top, a wee bit, but I just there is some no. If you're going to pin me down, for me, my opera of choice from the Who is probably Quadrophenia, but in fact it definitely is. But I get it. There's something about this that is significant. It's just never really bowled me over. But it always seemed a little out of step with what the Who did and who the Who were. This does not seem. I don't know. They're a bunch of mods. I don't know. I know you love this, and I'm not sure I'm doing a great job of defending my own position here, but there you go. See Me, Feel Me, at 25. One of the few who rarely make appearances on the singles charts in the United States. They very much were more an albums band, right? Their albums output in the United States, American consumers bought a lot of Who LPs, but the singles generally kind of flamed out early. I had that right, don't I, Dave?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. So another artist who had much more success as a kind of albums performer, but made the occasional foray onto the singles charts is at number 33, and it's Neil Young with "Only Love Can Break Your Heart." You got some thoughts about Mr. Young?
Well, this is from the After the Gold Rush album. A brilliant album. It's just
Yeah, I think so too.
And this is actually his first top 40 hit as a solo act. was released October 19th, 1970, like a year after it had been recorded. There's legend has it that he wrote this for Graham Nash after the breakup with Joni Mitchell.
Oh, yeah.
Neil Young himself has been reticent about actually confirming that, but yeah, we might as well say that's what it's about.
You know, and I don't know, did Nash ever record this? Because I could, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I could definitely see this and almost hear it in my head that this would be a Nash song.
Well, if he didn't, he's one of the few people who didn't cover it.
Yeah, that's right.
It was just incredibly popular. So I can't tell you. I don't remember seeing his name on the list.
I
Covers, but
I can't. It doesn't ring a bell with me. But that's interesting. I had not heard that story. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. No, it's Neil Young at this time. I mean, he's coming out of. I mean, he's a diffident figure, right? It's even like this 45 sleeve. That he has this persona. I mean, how would you describe sort of the Neil Young persona, kind of early 70s? How does he project himself? What's your take on that?
I think Neil Young is someone who easily draws people in. I think he's incredibly charismatic. He's a funny guy. He's intelligent, but he also kind of has a kiss my ass attitude. He's going to do what he wants.
Yeah.
And either you're okay with it or you're not, but he really doesn't care. And that's kind of his attitude on tour as well.
Yes.
He will do concerts of material that nobody wants to hear.
Quite famously. That's exactly right. I was at one.
You know, and just really doesn't care if this is what the audience is there for or not. It's what he wants to play, so he's going to play it.
Yes.
And there are other concerts that he gives that are just luminous. And that's why people continue to go to Neil Young concerts. But it's a hit or miss thing. And I think it's always a hit or miss thing with Neil Young, starting with Buffalo Springfield, through Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and so on. Yeah. When it works really well, and sometimes all of a sudden it doesn't work at all.
And Neil Young doesn't. Neil Young is interested in what Neil Young wants to do. I mean, he's quite famous in this regard. And I actually don't think it's the greatest of all personality traits. I think he's really left a lot of damage in his wake. I mean, I think that's pretty well known. I mean,
he famously bailed on a concert tour, on an entire concert tour with Stephen Stills.
Yep.
And didn't even talk to the guy beforehand. He left a note. Yeah, I'm leaving. I'm done. Eat a peach.
He's left Stephen Stills in the lurch many times. Eat a peach. The only thing I would quibble with in your description of Neil Young is him being funny.
Well, I think he's a funny guy.
Oh, he's funny like herpes.
Have you listened to Four Way Street?
He's not funny, man. I mean,
the funniest. This is the next song. Guaranteed to bring you right down. It's called "Don't Let It Bring Me Down."
Yeah, I tell you.
Kind of starts off real slow and then fizzles out altogether.
Oh God. Okay. Well,
I find him very, very musical.
Neil Young. He's such a peculiar figure. He's obviously incredibly gifted, but there is something about Neil Young following his own muse. I think that's been to his detriment on some level. I know that he doesn't give a shit what I think. I know that's the case. And you talk famously about him in concert. I was at a concert, and I haven't been to that many concerts in my life, but I was at a Neil Young show In the first half was the
Was
album.
the Pink Cadillacs?
Yeah, it was okay. So the first half of it was the trance. It was the electronic stuff from the early '80s, which was
Oh, I love it. Trance.
yeah,
Stuff,
and
right?
so did the people in the audience. So the second half opens and it's the shocking Pink '50s doo-wop.
Shocking Pink.
And oh my God, people were pissed. And so people were just streaming out right and left. Yeah, so and that's just one small example. He just, Neil Young's going to do what Neil Young's going to do, and he doesn't give a damn what you think. But I love Neil Young. I mean, like you, I love Neil Young. I can't get enough of him. So there you have it. Neil Young at 33 with Only Love Can Break Your Heart. Last song I want to talk about is from Mr. C, Perry Como. And it's like, okay, Perry Como. This may be a name that's vaguely familiar to some of you, but Perry Como was a singer who was quite popular in the United States for almost 50 years. His nickname.
It was one of my dad's favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. C. And Perry Como at number 34 has a song called "It's Impossible," which peaked at number 10. Something about Perry Como that we should note, and I just double checked this earlier today because it just sort of kind of blew my mind. Perry Como, during the course of his career, had 49 top 10 hits. It
Wow.
is, it's stunning. There are a few people in American recording history that sold more records than did Perry Como. He's really the longevity of his career is really quite astounding. The other thing about Como, for many people, was that he was a kind of familiar presence on television. He was there in the early days of television, and quite famously, he did these holiday specials, these Perry Como Christmas specials that were, kind of a seasonal, seasonal ritual for many people. He was had a kind of buoyant kind of personality. He was a crooner. He was a crooner. He didn't have the kind of the kind of appeal or aura that did a Sinatra did, but he sold a lot of records, and he certainly was, as you mentioned, one of your dad's favorites, one of many people's favorites. He passed away in 2001, but "It's Impossible" is, it's one of those songs that's right up there as one of the, one of the more important songs of the 20th century. It's a kind of memorable song that everybody can at least hum a little bit to. So we have Perry Como at number 34.
He passed away in 2001.
Yeah.
Help me out here. Who am I thinking of? One of the singers of that generation has, in the past few years, started something of a comeback attempt by doing duets with like Amy Winehouse, Lady Gaga. Who am I thinking of? Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett.
Left My Heart in San Francisco.
Who is?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, who's still, Tony Bennett.
Yeah,
who is a kind of contemporary, yeah, right. It's singers of that type, those crooners of that era, they had enormous appeal. They had an enormous fan base, and their longevity is just staggering. I mean, their careers, they're in the decades, right? 40, 50 years in the public spotlight. It's maybe we probably won't see that again, that kind of longevity. And maybe because of the nature of popular music and how things have differentiated and whatnot. But my Lord, when you can sell that many albums, you can have 49 top 10
wait a
hits.
second. How long has Bruce Springsteen been around? Just came out with a new album. Since the early 70s, right? What is that? Almost 50 years?
Yeah. That's true. No, that's true. Okay. I think he's the exception that proves the rule a little bit.
Elton John? Billy Joel?
Well, Billy Joel hasn't recorded an album in 30 years, but yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Well, to your point.
Until he died. His first album was in the mid 70s.
Well, there's four. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's pretty unusual. I mean, it's pretty unusual to have a career
Well,
that
if we're just talking
multiple
about
decades.
singers and not groups, groups like the Rolling Stones, for
Okay.
instance, Fleetwood Mac.
Okay. There. Yeah. We're almost to 10. I mean, you're right. You're right. You're right. And I think the thing that's different about Como and Sinatra is that they continue to have hits and sell a lot of records into their later years. Como had hits in the top 10 hits in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that certainly isn't the case with even Bruce Springsteen, right? And so there is something.
I think from Wrecking Ball did not have a top 10 hit.
Bruce Springsteen hasn't had a top 10 hit since the late 80s.
Seriously?
Seriously. And the same with
okay.
for Tom Petty. I mean, Tom Petty had hits his first 20 years, but he didn't have hits his last 20 years. Whereas certainly somebody like Como was still charting while he was in his fourth decade of popularity.
All right.
Now, I mean, the top 40 is a fickle thing, and it's not by any stretch the only judge of popularity. But Como is, I think, unusual in this regard. I mean, he still had hit singles, even as he was.
Streets of Philadelphia didn't make it to the top 10.
Well, I mean, that was 30 years ago.
The 90s.
Early 90s.
Late?
No, early 90s. but yeah, okay. I mean,
all right.
Springsteen's a good one, and so but Springsteen's unusual. I mean, he's singular in that regard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, sort of singular until you start to like pick on other examples. So that's it for the big hits from mid-December 1970. We'll obviously enter into 1971 in the next show. In 1971, will be a very interesting year. Really looking forward to it. I mean, it's really just monster songs from start to finish in 1971, and the introduction of really important artists as well. And so we're looking forward to the 1971 shows. So David,
going to miss 1970 was a good year for pop music, but 1971 we're starting off strong and just continuing. So
yeah,
lots to look forward to.
So Dave, you want to close us out with what people should be looking for?
Okay. Hopefully you've been following along with our songs that are on the playlist, which can be found here. You can subscribe to 50 Years Ago this month right here. And here's another example of one of our episodes right there.
Right. So thanks, everybody. And also check out the reading list as well. We will see you next month. And thanks again.
Stay safe out there.